with many signifying the two escalated stage happening.
5, 4, 3.
We have stage 2 engine ignition. 1 minute 25 seconds. Change pressure hold. No we have Hamilton Reynolds 236 291 4229.
Hey guys, Citywall here, and welcome back to Mars. This episode we're going to be building the upper of the two Hyperloop stations, but before we do that I thought maybe we would just jump in game and I could show you a little bit of what's going on in the city right now, how much we've built and how much is left to build. So here we are in game, and as you can tell, a pretty big portion of the city has been complete. Compared to the whole floor of the basin, this is probably about 2/3, but then there's also like a lot of stuff around the walls of the crater that need to get built. So all in all, I would say we're maybe about 1/3 the way done inside the dome. So you can see over here is like a big empty area that'll be more city floor area, kind of like the base of the crater over here as well. But then like up along the walls here, it's kind of going to be a combination of things like Skib's area, that's maybe more like the equivalent of a suburb, but then also stuff like this where it's like really industrial stuff kind of along the edge of the dome, and maybe some like parks and things around there too, some agriculture, more services. And then the other question is like what to do with areas like this up around the very top of the dome. Are we going to use this? Are we just going to turn it into some sort of really rough terrain? So that's yet to be seen. We'll see what ends up happening with that. So over here, you know, obviously we can ignore all this stuff on the ground. This is just like little bits of things that I was building and saving for later. You can see like some familiar little pieces of things that have been made. And this is sort of like the bare bones road network for this half of the city. Obviously that'll be a lot more specific once like things get built and this gets replaced with conveyor belts. This road up here will be inside of sort of like a mall, I'm thinking. We'll do some slums around here, maybe some agriculture along the back crater face. And then if we take a look outside the dome, so we're kind of oriented in this direction because this is the way that the Hyperloop and the 4 conveyor belts exit the city. So directly out here is where the spaceport will be, I think. And we might also do some other services out in this direction, perhaps like sewage or some more power generation. There will be a really large solar farm, I'm thinking, that'll take up most of the area behind the dome, like all of this. We're gonna have to do a really, really big solar farm. And then I'm a little bit on the fence of like how much work to really put into the outside of the dome areas, because obviously this map is huge, and I don't know, you know, if I do like a little bit of detail here, will that all of a sudden look really weird from a distance? You know, is it gonna have to be detailed everywhere? Am I going to be able to get away with doing minimal detailing everywhere and have that look good? So I think that'll be something that we'll have to address kind of once we get out here, because I do have a lot of things that I would like to build like a little bit further out, you know, little outposts and stuff, abandoned things, little services here and there. The other question about out there is obviously I use helicopters for all my services, like police and medical and everything like that, and so I need to prevent helicopters from flying through the dome and out here to get to something. So I'm not exactly sure how I'm going to do that. So back inside the dome, just to like show you around a little bit, obviously we got the, you know, central market here, the red market in this area. This is some of the first stuff that got built down in here. This little street here, we got our algae oxygen generators over here, the entrance to the city for the upper level people. Up here we got our climate control headquarters, the helicopter and cable car depots, and a bunch of like, you know, just generic kind of city stuff in here. The island, the first island that we made, which is actually starting to look very different now that there's things attached to all different parts of it, like different walkways leading out from it. Didn't used to have all that. We got our really big, you know, triple decker island. This bridge over here leads us to this sort of nightclub area up above, and sort of the main building of the whole place, the prison from a few episodes ago, Skib's area back here, which would be fun to expand upon at some point, and stuff from this episode in the back here. So let's just jump into this. So this episode, what we're doing is building the upper Hyperloop station. And for the people who live up here, this is a pretty central part of the city because not only is it like physically in the center, it's also kind of like your link to the rest of Mars, which, you know, you're probably pretty free to travel around if you live in this upper area. I wanted the Hyperloop tubes to kind of come into the crater at the same height as these upper areas so that the station was just at like ground level, like the train just pulled right up to the height of the upper area. And because these train stations are a little finicky, I had to raise up a lot of terrain here and place down roads exactly where I wanted the stations to go, and then place down the stations and not move them again. And I hooked them up to each other, made a little loop. One of them is sort of the inbound, one of them is the outbound. In the game, it doesn't exactly work like that, but in my mind, that's what I'm imagining. So the next thing I did was take one of these conveyor belts that exits out of the central sorting exchange and have it kind of go into a little tunnel and pop out and connect up to these two train stations, and then head back down towards that conveyor belt that was underneath the lower area station. So once it was actually working and I could see trains pulling up here, it was about, you know, trying to make this whole entire area look good. And since we already had all this terrain raised up, I thought this was a really good excuse to make our first kind of little lake or water area with actual in-game water as opposed to water props. So I used Ronix's terraforming network to make like a rim to this lake and raise it up, and then lowered the terrain inside of that lake and just filled it in with like one of those little water creator things from the extra landscaping tools. And the way I wanted the station to work is for this loop that connects the two sides of the train station to be completely covered up with stuff. I didn't want to see any of that. And so I thought it'd be cool, you know, maybe we use some of these gray flame red rocks here. And because this is like your connection to the rest of Mars, maybe the station could sort of be like Mars themed a little bit. So I started placing down a ton of these rocks in combination with that water, which I think looked really cool, making this kind of like a natural sort of lake in some ways. A few of the rocks I turned into procedural objects so I could scale them down and rotate them in just a little bit. And I created this one little spot where there's a smaller rock over the crease in two others. So there's like a little hole and a little opening, and I placed a very black prop in the back there and started placing down some of these Kaminogi waterfalls coming out of there, kind of like this was a artificial, you know, waterfall here. So using these red gray flame rocks and this waterfall really got me thinking that, you know, this station maybe should be sort of like an homage or a monument to Mars itself. Like this place, you know, this Hyperloop station opens up the red planet to everyone who lives here. And so the theme of the station is kind of like Mars and the red rocks. And so because of that, I decided to do sort of like a balancing rock sculpture here. And I wanted to make it really big and kind of like a huge focal point of the city. So I used procedural objects on those gray flame rocks to just stack them in a really crazy way. So that was the next thing here. Before I really could get into actually building things this episode, like on this area, I had to make the surface of it. And inside this upper station, obviously the roads are a little bit lower than where the surface would be and where the trains would pull up to. So I covered that up with ploppable surfaces and started working on a rim around the outside of the station to make this into its own island. So like I mentioned last episode, I created a little bridge that gets us from that very first island that we made in episode 5 and connects to this area. And the back of this Hyperloop station, like where these rocks are and where the tube kind of does a U-turn through the rocks, is very close to this central sorting exchange. And I wanted this central sorting exchange from the moment I built it to have like a top part of it. Like it never really felt finished up above. And so I wanted to connect that to this Hyperloop station and kind of finish out this whole central sorting exchange, permanently, finally. So I started off by just placing down the railway siding pieces to create the edges of this like circular walkway, and connected that up to the kind of like purple nightclub island on one side, and then obviously connected it up to the station area on the other side. It was pretty tedious, like filling this up with concrete that needs to go underneath so that you can't see upwards, and also with poppable surfaces over the top. Both of those I used PO, and just one by one went and changed the vertices to get all the way around the circle. It took forever. And then I was left with sort of a gap between, where the platform and walkway is and where the top of the sorting exchange walls kind of end. And that's really the question of how I was going to fill this gap and make it look cool and make it look like it was actually supporting the circle above. And so my first attempt was to take some expressway pillars and just stretch them and make them bigger and kind of put them at angles, so that this was kind of like a curved wall that went from being flat at the bottom to being curved at the top. And I thought that would be a pretty cool looking way to do it. But the issue is that sometimes when you use procedural objects in very particular ways, it can kind of mess up the way that the game like sees surfaces. And specifically when you're using the post-process effects mod, it like creates this crazy blackness sort of deal on like certain surfaces when you do that. And that's what ended up happening here. I had to scratch this idea because it was just becoming too intense with this kind of like weird glitchy blackness. And so what I did instead was took some more horizontal expressway pillars and made them really long, like the length of the entire sorting exchange, and placed down one on the bottom that was perfectly flat, and then duplicated it up to like one step up and started playing with the vertices. So that one was just slightly curved, and then the one above it was slightly more curved, until by the time we got to the top, it was at the shape of the circle, and it was creating like the final support that was much more similar to the circle shape up above. So it was kind of a gradient of curves. And I think this turned out really, really cool, because not only did it not have that same sort of glitchiness to it, but it made this into much more of like a geometric kind of shape, as opposed to just being a smooth surface that the old plan would have been. So then on the back side of the Hyperloop, this part that's still facing the sorting exchange, that's where I wanted the entrance of the Hyperloop station to actually be. Like you would enter it from this big circle here. And not only that, I also wanted this area that's like just beyond there to be sort of the beginning of like a mall almost. Like this central part of the city here that we're building in this episode is partially the Hyperloop station, but then kind of all around it is like a place for shopping. And so what I did was I made a ramp on either side that goes up and over the top of where this entrance was going to be, using some more of those railway siding pieces and some retaining walls and some network surfaces. For the entrance of the actual station, I used this vanilla building from the Green Cities DLC that has a nice little awning over the top of it, and clipped that inside of this retaining wall. I wanted to expand on that awning idea, and so I used some procedural objects to make kind of like a bigger awning. And at the front of it, I found this really cool kind of like 3D sign that says something, but I realized that all the letters in that word were reversible letters, like, X, T, like, or whatever the letters are, but they can flip, one way or the other. So I turned the sign backwards so that it made some like nonsense word, and used procedural objects to take those letters and individually kind of like move them around the curve of this awning so that it was like a curved sign, which was really cool. Put some kind of like gravel decals on the top, like this was just sort of like a roof texture on the top of this awning. And then right in the center on the top, I placed this insanely awesome custom animation 3D statue thing. It's like a head that Sven Berlin made, and it like has this insanely cool rotating animation where little strips of the face are like moving around in different ways. Oh my god, it's like the coolest thing I've ever seen. So I was super excited to be able to finally place that down in the city, and that's where it's going, right at the top of the entrance to this Hyperloop station. Detailing up the actual circle walkway of this was like really difficult for some reason. I had a really hard time figuring out a good way to do it. I had all these different iterations with like, different types of lights and different types of things over the pathway, but I ended up just settling on these really big spotlights that aim up, some other kind of like more normal street lights that aim down, and some benches and little like binocular things for people to like look down into the central sorting exchange from this walkway up here. A couple big signs like saying, you know, maybe this is some sort of tourist attraction, or this is a place you would go on a field trip when you're like a little kid. And then the last thing I wanted to make was sort of an extension of that oil industry building that sticks up from the center of the sorting exchange, because I wanted there to be like upper, you know, lookout area for people who are like working with these crates to be able to, you know, maybe monitor where they go or control, you know, I'm sure there's a whole system with the barcodes and which one goes where and everything, and there's an office that needs to run that. So I wanted that like right in the center of this central sorting exchange. So I made like one segment of this tower that I used some pillars, some really big kind of like metal concrete pillars on all four sides, and put some stairs up the middle of it and stacked that on top of each other over and over, and then put another one of those same buildings that Skib used in his build, this kind of like square, I think it's this San Diego library, something like that. It's a library building, put it at the top of it. My original plan was to have a bunch of beams coming down from this thing supporting that giant circle walkway and not having that even connected to anything, having it being suspended from this thing, but that ended up looking a little weird. I decided against it, and so this is mainly just here for kind of like administration running these crates. For the actual Hyperloop station, this was something that took me a really long time to figure out a way to make this look good. For me, it was the kind of thing I struggled with so much because it felt like every single decision about this place needed to be so thought out because it's so central to the city. You're going to be seeing it from almost anywhere. It's like dead in the middle. So there was really a lot of like placing a bunch of stuff down, looking at it for a while, deleting it, replacing it, trying something else. I knew that obviously these stations are coming in at an angle, and that means that this lake in the middle is also kind of like angled and triangle shaped. And so what I decided to do was play off of that. I took the concrete square that I made from that cube tutorial. It's like just a concrete cube, and I stretched it a little bit so it was diamond shaped. And I started creating this cool kind of like honeycomb cascading pattern of diamonds that make up the edge of this lake. I put some ploppable surfaces like a couple feet underneath the surface of the water so that this didn't look like a 50-foot deep lake. It looked like a very shallow kind of pond. And going off the idea that this place is sort of like a little bit of a monument to the planet itself, I asked some people who are on the City Wall Discord and do some amazing asset creation work to help me make an asset. So Nardo, who made the Joy holograms that you might have seen and I used in episode 11 at the top of that purple area, made sort of like a holographic Mars with two kind of holographic moons. And then Corvo, who's made some assets with the custom animation loader mod that allows you to make animated assets in a really crazy way, animated this so that the planet spins and the moons spin around it, which was super cool. So I placed that in the middle of this lake, put some red lights on top of this little pillar that would be maybe projecting the hologram, and put some more red lights all over the pond to kind of give this like a little bit of a pockmarked like weird red pattern going on the bottom. For the actual decoration of this main open area that's like the waiting area, the terminal, you know, for this Hyperloop, this is really where I was like struggling with what it was going to look like. I placed down like rows of benches and all sorts of different types of trees, and I ended up coming to the conclusion that the more different types of things that I placed down here, the weirder it looked. And so what I decided to do was play off of that idea of diamonds and make everything in this area kind of diamond shaped. So I used more of those cubes, stretch them a little bit, you know, obviously, to make diamond shaped benches with a little piece of concrete in the middle to kind of make the back of the bench. I took a planter and stretched that diamond shaped and made that into like a diamond shaped planter with a little tree at the end that I could place around as well. And I had originally made this little like kiosk desk thing of the glowing cubes and a little surface desktop and some holograms up above. And originally it was square shaped, but I like stretched it and changed it so that it could be diamond shaped and it could all kind of flow into this same sort of diamond idea. One of the stations here I was thinking is like the departures and one is the arrival. So next to the departures one, I placed a bunch of like ticket kiosks that you would walk up to and buy a ticket to go wherever you wanted to. I would assume this is a very open place. And the other one I made sort of like just a little bit of a barrier to kind of guide people, towards the exit so that the arrivals, you don't have to go to this big waiting area and walk through there. You just kind of like guided right towards the exit. And the entrance and exit of this whole entire place I placed on either side. There's 2 of them, and they come out from underneath one of these really big red rocks. And it's really simple. All it is just a row of a couple of those glowing cubes with a piece of concrete on the front end of it to kind of give it like an end. So you're walking into this kind of futuristic, glowy walkway. And I wanted the place where the Hyperloop trains actually pull up to be going off that same idea. So I placed down a bunch of those same smaller versions of the glowy cubes and placed some sort of metal over the top of it and shaped that into being like planters, where I filled it with a bunch of hedges and kind of just did that on both sides, in different ways. On, the back side, there's some trees. Over the top of the tube, there's a couple different levels of it. Along the back side of this whole entire station, I was thinking that there would be a walkway that took you from one side of the station to the other. And so underneath that walkway, I placed down this really big vanilla building so that you could just see some windows here. Maybe it was like a place where you could go inside and wait or get food or something. And over the top of that, I placed down another one of these procedural objects, text animated things that I've been using all over. You saw it last episode in that station, but I used it here as well. That thing is super cool. Basically what you do is you add a text element in procedural objects once you turn this into a procedural object, and you can type things or add different colored rectangles and it will just animate it, which is super cool. It does it all on its own. So I just typed out some general schedule, everything is on time, running smooth. And then the finishing touch for this whole area was I took some wires and ran them diagonally so that it was continuing with this diamond shape over the top of this whole area. Got a couple little PO kind of cylinder things and placed them at different areas and put lights inside of there so that it was kind of like these wires were holding up suspended lights that lit up this whole entire station at night. The last thing this episode was just making my way detailing a good amount of this area around the station that was still up here. And like I said before, this is going to be kind of like a mall up here. There's going to be a lot of shops and this is going to be a very central part of the city. So I wanted this to feel very walkable, like there was a lot of ramps to get you up and over, for instance, like the Hyperloop tubes and up on top of the station entrance. So after I got the general shape of what this kind of upper island was going to look like, I started working on this ramp that goes up and over the top of the 2 Hyperloops. And to do this was actually a lot more complicated than it might appear on the surface, because what we have is 2 railway siding pieces that curve and go up. They start at a skinnier width and then make their way up, and they get wider and wider as they get higher. And in a normal scenario, if this wasn't getting wider as it went up, you could use a really nice network surface segment. But because it's getting wider, you would have to use 2 and they can never really line up perfectly. So this had to be done with POs, like manually moving up and placing each and every little vertice on the edge of each piece of ploppable surface. So this took a really long time, but I think the final result was worth it. This is pretty cool looking. So I made this path, like half of it go up and be this ramp, and then the other half goes underneath where the ramp goes. And I thought under here it would be cool if there was like maybe a really nice restaurant underneath this ramp and then kind of using this patio space behind it. So underneath there I placed the building that would be like the entrance to the restaurant, and then in the back I placed down a combination of different PO ploppable surfaces and network surfaces to give this a really specific kind of grass and concrete shape, where there's a little fountain and there's a bunch of picnic benches on the grass with some umbrellas above it. And I placed a bunch more of these doors like along here, as if this was a really just big window that you could walk in and out of in different places, and some awnings and lights up above. In this little like nook where the two paths split off from, I wanted there to be some sort of statue here. Like I originally tried out some buildings and that didn't really feel right. It was hard to get it to make this really sharp curve, or to find something kind of circular that would work. So a statue I thought would be cool, and I found this one that's actually a vanilla statue, believe it or not. It's like one of the ones from the base game, and I turned it into procedural objects so that it would get rid of all those like decals and props and things that come with it, like those really weird tile decals, and made it larger and put it up here and just surrounded it with a bunch of plants and stuff. So that actually ended up looking really cool, especially with these purple lights that I put facing upwards towards like these skinny tall people. There's this really big wall here that's like the backside of where these shops and things start. And along this wall, I thought it would be really cool to put a ton of ivy. So there's ivy going around this like sign for the restaurant and all the way along this big long wall. And up here is really where I thought like the mall would really start, and it would wrap around. And I didn't exactly finish, I didn't even get close to finishing this mall this episode. This is kind of just the beginning of it to start getting ideas of how it could look. But basically building this shopping area up here was just a very tedious process of placing down different of these Monaco shops with some like Monaco balustrades up above them, and then like a second walkway up above that where there would be some benches, some hedges and planters, some ploppable surfaces to kind of make the flat area where you could walk around up there, and then another level of shops up above. On top of those, there's like more Monaco balustrades and some hedges and some really tall skinny trees. And then throughout this whole thing, there's a bunch of different areas where there's stairs to get you from the lower level to the upper shops, you know. Right in the middle of where the two Hyperloop tracks are, I was thinking this would be a good place to have a path that leads us to the edge of the crater. So I made a little bit of that path and had some stairs that go up to the upper shops that come off of this little path. And right in the center where this meets up with this other major walkway and where this mall is, I put a really big statue here, this kind of modern swirly sculpture. And then after I was done making the sort of non-functioning version of this, like how it looks just using POs, I obviously had to make it functional. So I turned all the POs to a layer and made the layer invisible and ran a road through all of this and placed down a bunch of commercial block services and pedestrian paths all throughout it as well. So it's completely functional. People will go into these shops and things, but it's all procedural objects, buildings, just with the block services inside. The last thing that got built this episode was this area that kind of connects it all. And I thought that the first thing here could be kind of a cool maybe beacon or tall building. I found this really cool one that matched kind of that. Placed some network walls around each side and put some awnings over all four entrances and made this into kind of like the center where you could enter it from any side. And it was kind of like a beacon. There's this cube holographic thing that I put on top and this square sign directly below that, and some plants and these planters down below. Directly behind that, I placed down a vanilla asset from the Green Cities DLC. It's this public market, and thought this could be sort of like a grocery store. So I placed two of them back to back to make it like pretty big and take up a lot of space here. Along this curved pathway to the side, I placed down a number of different little shops and things, most of them by Lord Grooney, kind of arranged in a really nice curved shape. And on top of some of them, I put down some Monaco balustrades along the wall of it, and some hedges and plants and tables and chairs and awnings and a door that leads into the market. So this is maybe like a little outdoor restaurant that's attached to that grocery store is what I was thinking. And then all of these buildings are obviously jutting up right into this big rock that is covering up this Hyperloop where it turns around and goes the other direction. And on top of this, I wanted this to be the other kind of entrance to the mall from this side. And I wanted there to be a platform that goes up and over most of these rocks here. And I was having a really hard time trying to figure out what to do with this area. I was thinking about it for a really long time, and I decided eventually just to do it in a patrons only live stream so that everyone could help me kind of figure out what would be a good thing to build here. And we decided on a little amphitheater, like maybe a place where someone could do a little play or a speech or performance, and people could sit around and watch on all these different levels of benches and things. So started out by taking a Ronix Expressway pillar and bending it into a little bit of a curve. I duplicated it up to like one step up and changed the shape of it just a little bit so it was like the next place where someone could sit, and did that over and over and over until I had like 7 or 8 stairs leading all the way up to the top. I put some Monaco balustrades again up along the back side of it, and then copied that like 6 or 7 times to make sort of like a semicircle here. I took these canopy assets that I have and placed it along the backside and did some really painstaking, tedious PO work, just moving the vertices in order to make this into the same kind of circular shape as the rest of it, so that I could copy that over and over around the top. I put some stairs going up the left and the right here with a little railing on the side so that you could hold on as you're walking up. In the center of the amphitheater, there's a circle that I was thinking is kind of like a stage, and I put some amps around it and someone standing there with like a microphone. Around the edge, there's a bunch of grass out there, so I put a lot of plants and trees and some ivy growing up this Monaco wall here in this similar way as it gets done on that other big wall on the other side. And lastly, just some shops that I used PO to just change the shape of the buildings a little bit. Some little standing tables that I turned green for whatever random reason and put some little people standing there, and a tent that was maybe like a bar where you can maybe go get some drinks or some snacks or something. There's some crates behind there, some decals on the ground, some string lights, and some posts holding them up. But in this direction, I'm thinking this is where the rest of the mall is going to be. So going out towards this way, we'll have like an upper part of the mall, a lower part of the mall. It'll be a whole thing kind of in this style, but we'll add unique and cool things along the way. So I don't know if that's going to be next episode, but that's definitely planned for around here. So we now have 2 Hyperloop stations, an upper one and a lower one. This upper one is obviously way bigger and more grandiose and really is a central part of the city, whereas the lower one is somewhere maybe you just kind of take very depressingly to work. But it's really cool seeing it done and in the city, and especially attached to this whole entire central sorting facility. It really brings this whole city to life, because one of the things I was really imagining in my head before I started this series was I wanted this upper part of the city to feel like that was the ground and everything below it was kind of underground. And this is the first time that it's really feeling like that for me, because up until this point, everything has been islands on the upper part of the city. And now it feels more like there's a really big hole in the center of the city, and the lower parts of the city are in that hole, which I think is really, really cool. So I hope you guys enjoyed this Hyperloop saga. It's been months and months in the making for me. These last 2 episodes, this has been the biggest project in the city by far. If you guys make anything cool using the Hyperloop asset, send it to me on Discord or wherever. I would love to see it. I hope you guys enjoyed this episode, and I'll see you all next time on Mars.